Waldy and Bendy.
Hello and welcome to Waldy and Bendy's Adventures in Art, the podcast they could not stop because art never sleeps. Now I'm Waldemar Januszczak, art critic of the Sunday Times, and I'm joined at the wheel of this camper van of fun by a man who used to be two people. First, he was Bendor Smith, a railway worker from Dagenham, but he was also Dick Grosvenor, a gigolo from Perth in Scotland, until the BBC got hold of them and spliced them together to form Bendor Grosvenor, the celebrated art historian who drives women crazy. Now, Bendor, be honest here. Do you ever wake up feeling like a stranger to yourself?
All the time, Wald. Have you been talking to my therapist?
No, but I've seen your eyes. I'm looking at your face right now, and all I see is problematics.
Yeah. No, I've got no idea who I am. And I think the editors of BBC Panorama, even they could not splice me together to make a sensible single montage that describes me. But you, Wald, you are perfectly formed and you require no editing intervention at all. And I know that because our producer, Taya, is also your editor. And she tells me that the films you make, what's the saying? They cut like butter.
Well, yeah, I don't need any editing because I'm always filmed on widescreen, and unfortunately, I'm naturally widescreen shaped. So obviously, yes, we're referring to Panorama. Rather clunky introduction there, referring to what the BBC's been up to, and we'll come to that in a moment. But it's not the only thing we're going to be doing on this particular podcast, is it, Bendor? Because I think we're going to be breaking the world record for having celebrated art historians on one podcast. Because apart from you and me, we're also going to be talking to the great Andrew Graham-Dixon about his controversial new book on Vermeer. So that's going to be exciting. Plus, there you are, holding it up. It's a beautiful thing. Plus, apart from Vermeer, we're going to be searching for the ugliest royal portrait in history. And that's obviously prompted by the adventures of the Windsors in general and Andrew Mountbatten Windsor in particular, but it has caused us to search for the ugliest, the worst royal portrait. And believe me, there are an awful lot of contenders, so that's coming up later. But first, as I said, the poor old BBC, it's in trouble again. And I'm afraid you and I are going to add to its miseries. It's shocking news from the art world. Bendor, oh dear. Unless you've been living on the planet Mars, you would have heard all these attacks in the last few days on the BBC. They made a tragic editorial mistake with their Panorama. They've been accused of all sorts of failures of impartiality. And Donald Trump has threatened to sue them for $1 billion. Now, as I speak, that threat is still hanging over their heads. So for all we know, that might yet be happening in the future. But this is not a political podcast. We don't really want to go into too much Donald Trump on this. But I think what I'd like to talk to you about is something else, which is the BBC's arts coverage, which to my eyes has also failed dismally. In fact, I think it's failed more dismally, really, than any of its political coverage, because basically there's so little of it. It's as if the BBC has forgotten its public service remit should involve having things that nobody else is doing, such as arts programming. And by and large, it's just not doing enough of it. Would you agree with me?
I do agree, Wald. And a disclaimer that as you and I both used to be on the BBC, you quite a lot, me occasionally, and we're no longer on the BBC, we are obviously open to the charge of being disgruntled former BBC arts presenters. And what's that sound you can hear there, Wald? Oh, it's the sound of me grinding my axes. I've had many axes to grind, Wald, but I think you raise a very important point. And actually, I promise you what I'm about to say is not about whether I'm not on the BBC anymore, because arts coverage is really important for public service broadcasting. Only the BBC really has done it continuously for many decades, building up a wonderful asset database, momentum for arts program, and it used to be something they did really seriously before Tim Davie, the current Director General, or the now late Director General, resigned. Do you remember Tim Davies' predecessor, Tony Hall? He was big on the arts, wasn't he, Wild?
Well, he came from the world of arts, didn't he? So indeed, he seemed to have more interest in the arts, certainly than some of indeed some of his predecessors, but also certainly than Tim Davie. So you did feel that there was someone who had a foot in the arts running the BBC. That has not felt so for quite a while now.
No, and I've got some statistics for you here, Wild. So, Tim Davie becomes Director General in 2020. BBC Four, which was the channel which used to have, the kind of cheap and cheerful arts documentaries that you and I used to make, beloved by audiences, I have to say. That's closed in 2022, and I've got some stats here for the decline in spend on arts and music. So 2022, it was 39 million. The latest accounts, it's gone down to 32 million, and that includes the proms, of course, so it includes classical music. So that's a fall of nearly 20% in 3 years. Now, we should say that the BBC licence fee has been kind of frozen for a lot of that period, but that's still a greater fall than the overall cut in income that they get. And there's one more final statistic for you. Ofcom used to have a target for arts hours broadcast every year by the BBC. And in 2023, the last year for which we have the figures, the BBC missed its target. It was supposed to produce 175 hours, and it only made 131. And Wild, we can't keep track of that target anymore because Ofcom has abolished the target. So it's bad news all round for the Guild of Arts TV presenters like you and me.
Listen, we have axes to grind. We're two sad middle-aged white blokes who used to be on the telly a lot, and now we're not. Well, we're still on the telly in corners here and there, but we're not on the BBC. So of course we're bitter and we're resentful and we feel that we've been let down and all that. No, it's unquestionably true. But if I can bring my lengthy experience of arts television to bear on this, I mean, I started out in terms of being a sort of management figure in television at the Channel 4 back in the 1990s. So I was head of arts at Channel 4 in those days. And for about 7 years, I watched the budget grow. And Channel 4 invested up to 10, 12 million pounds a year in arts programming. It was a really important part of what Channel 4 thought it did. Now, look at Channel 4 today. You show me the arts programming. They occasionally have the wonderful Grace and Perry on, but that's social history. That isn't any more arts programming. ITV, I've done a couple of South Bank shows for the ITV with Melvyn Bragg. Do you remember the South Bank show? It used to play weekly. It was powerful. It was big. It was important. Where's that gone? It's disappeared. The BBC, I started out on the BBC doing stuff on BBC Two. BBC Two was a channel that to a large extent had arts programming on it. And of course it did. It was a sensible thing for BBC Two to be doing. BBC One would do kind of news, drama, Strictly Come Dancing sort of programmes, but BBC Two would do other stuff because part of the public service remit is to do things that nobody else is doing. And the only way you can really do that is if you're not reliant on advertising directly for the money, but that you have a higher sense, as it were, a Reithian sense, to do something for the populace that no one else is doing. Now, once you lose that ambition, then what happens is what's been happening to the BBC. So first of all, you hardly see any arts programming on BBC Two unless it's Glastonbury or the proms. That eats up loads of money, and of course it supplies lots of material. So if you cover the proms or you cover Glastonbury, you film, and then use that for hours and hours and hours afterwards, and then you send stuff to Ofcom saying we've had 130 hours of arts on the television. What they really mean is they've had 130 hours of people strumming guitars at Glastonbury. The series that come along, the series are increasingly rare. So then they moved that to BBC Four. And that you and I had our kind of heyday on BBC Four. We did a lot of work there, and it was cheerful. People used to watch it and they enjoyed it. Yeah, and that's been basically traduced completely. It's been turned into a repeats channel. So it's an international tendency, I think, not to have lots of arts programming. But in England, we bucked the trend. In Britain, we bucked the trend for quite a while. Channel 4 used to do a lot. ITV used to do it significantly. The BBC used to do it significantly. Think of all the series like Imagine, Omnibus, Arena that used to be on. And pretty much all of that has gone. I mean, instead, we get the occasional big international trophy series, which isn't really an art series at all. It's more an attempt to, I don't know, exploit the BBC brand, let's say. So we are talking not just about the BBC, but about an international trend and a British trend. Now, sorry, I'm gabbling on, but this really does make me upset. What the worst thing about all this is how stupid it is. Now, time after time, people bash the BBC, right? And they say to them, you shouldn't be getting the license fee. You know, you're not doing anything anybody else does. If they could turn around to all those people in the House of Lords, you know, all the old timers making the decisions and say, look, we make arts programs. We treat the arts seriously. We do things no one else is doing. Of course we should have the license fee, because if we don't, who else is going to make these kind of educative and informative and helpful programs? But instead of doing that, they do the opposite. They reduce the arts coverage. And I mean, the amounts of brownie points they must lose by basically going into competition with all the commercial TV stations to searching for the same kind of demographic, you know, the 19 to 29-year-olds who watch these things. It's just sheer political stupidity as far as I'm concerned, and shows an absolute lack of leadership. And Tim Davie has unfortunately been the worst of those.
Yeah, well, that's why Tony Hall, when he was Director General, before the last charter renewal negotiations, he made such a big deal about the arts programme. He did exactly what you said, and it worked for him. They got a renewal of the Royal Charter. So, but now with all this stuff in the background, who knows what's going to happen? But as you say, the case for public service broadcasting has to be made, and we will continue to make it well. Do you know why? Because we're evangelists for the arts. That's why we're doing this show, this podcast, gratis for everyone to enjoy. We love talking about art, and we love bringing people into the art tent. The other thing, well, is don't forget when we were on the telly, how cheap we were. You know, an hour of arts telly is what? You can do one for not even 100,000 quid. Right?
Yeah.
So that's cheap.
Absolutely. So an hour of drama is roughly £1 million. You get 10 arts programs for that. For an hour of Poldark, you know, swap an hour of Poldark for 10 films about the history of art. Every time you think about this any deeper, it becomes more and more obvious to me that it's a strategic mistake by the BBC to avoid the arts, but it's also a kind of cultural tragedy. And the poor old BBC, which is essentially set up to do great things for us, and it still does in many, many instances. You know, it's still a great institution. We should be so proud of it, but it is letting the arts down.
Oh, I'm really enjoying this one. It's all coming off the chest. I feel it's all coming out. I feel much better. I started talking about therapy. This is the best therapy I can possibly have. But you sent me a link kindly to the latest BBC Arts offering, which was another series of Civilization. And I watched that last night. I think it's coming out next week or the week after.
Yeah, it's coming out this week. Yeah,
I watched it last night with my wife, Wild, and we fell asleep. Did you get through to the end?
I did. But you know why I got through to the end? Because I got angrier and angrier and angrier with it. I mean, by the time it finished, I was boiling with rage at the sheer awfulness of it. I mean, it's basically a disaster movie pretending to be a program about the arts. So they've chosen, certainly in the first one, which is the only one I've seen, they've chosen to make the sack of Rome by the barbarians under Alaric the focus of this investigation of empires. And it starts with Rome burning. Basically, occasionally when Rome isn't burning, some sweaty-bodied actor pretending to be a Roman in a toga appears wielding a sword. And when they're not on, you get some...
In slow motion. Always in slow motion.
In slow motion. Or it's a big drone shot. And then there's this portentous voiceover, which seems to me to be straight out of the kind of disaster movie playbook. Do you remember that guy that used to do all the disaster movie voiceovers? Like, was it his name? Dom LaFontaine, I think it was. And he would always be, when the end of civilization comes, so humanity needed a hero, and a hero arrives. You know, that kind of stuff. And it's an absolute nonsense.
It was delivered really slowly, wasn't it? It was kind of, and then the Romans came along and did something.
Yeah, in slow motion indeed, with shots of the sky,
Yeah.
lots and lots of shots of the sky, lots and lots of drone shots of the landscape. So basically, they must have employed a lot of drone pilots hovering up and that, and this dreaded dramatic reconstruction. Now I don't know about you, but whenever I've made a film about the past where we haven't got anything to show, because you weren't there when Leonardo da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa or Michelangelo painted the Sistine ceiling. We have to kind of sort of put something in there if you can't actually show what they're doing. And for me, it's always a great test of the director's inventiveness. I like to use funny props, or I might try and find some interesting way to imply what they were doing, or show some research photos or archive. There are ways around it. What they do here is the cheap, well, no, it's not cheap. It's the instant way of recreating the past, which is basically to recreate the past by having unclothed actors in togas running around pretending they're Romans. And at least half the film consisted of that, didn't it?
Yeah, it was. There was a lot of drama reconstruction in it. It was all done in slow motion for some reason, so there was no dialogue. It was just kind of for visuals. But a lot of the budget must have gone on that, and it was expensive. I think it was. I see it that it was filmed in Hungary, so perhaps they got some kind of Hungarian tax break. All the Romans did look. They did look quite Hungarian, didn't they? But anyway, there was a lot of that. A lot of not very good CGI. I suspect it was done like that because they need to be able to sell it abroad. So, to repackage these things for, I don't know, Discovery Channel in the US or whatever it is, you've got to have kind of burly looking chaps in togas wielding a sword about. But then, listeners can watch this and make their own minds up, of course. But it was just a kind of mishmash, wasn't it? So you had a lot of drama reconstruction, and then you had a lot of different talking heads. So there wasn't one presenter, as in, back in the old days, starting with Kenneth Clark, you would have had a single narrative voice. You had a kind of mishmash of contributors, some of whom were much keener to be on the television than others. And then shoehorned into the middle of this film was the occasional trip to the vaults of the British Museum to talk about an object there that wasn't always relevant to the story. I don't know. It just felt to me like this program had been dreamt up by some execs, some BBC execs, had a big budget to spend. Rather than spend it on lots of hours of old-fashioned arts TV, they wanted to make some big thing that they could sell abroad. So they put all these factors into the sausage machine: the drama reconstruction, the CGI, the talking heads, the British Museum stuff, occasional attempts to get contemporary relevance. So there was, immigration and racism in there. And out at the end came this kind of televisual blancmange. I found it very disappointing and a bad sign of things to come.
Indeed. What's been lost here is the truth about art. That's what's been lost. What art really is. I mean, it takes at least 10, 12 minutes before we actually see an art object in this. And then the 3 or 4 that are featured are treated so casually. In my view, this doesn't qualify as an arts programme. In my view, this qualifies as a kind of more of a disaster movie than an arts programme. So, I found it
Yeah.
grueling to watch. We better move on. I mean, for heaven's sake, we'll never get employed by anybody ever again, Bendor, to present anything, let alone for the BBC, if you don't shut me up. So shut me up right now.
Okay, I'm going to stop you talking. My special skill in life is burning bridges, so we've thoroughly burned them. Let's get back to the truth about art with our lovely discussion with Andrew Graham-Dixon.
The interview.
So the great Andrew Graham-Dixon Wild has just published a new book on Vermeer. It's called Vermeer, A Life Lost and Found, and it's hit the news, it's hit the headlines because it makes some quite groundbreaking and controversial, at least in the art historical world, conclusions about what Vermeer was really up to. And if I could very quickly summarise Andrew's thesis, we'll go into that in the interview, but he basically totally subverts our understanding of Vermeer by looking in particular at his religion and his faith. And he also focuses on a sometimes underappreciated fact that about 20 of Vermeer's paintings were made for this one couple, and they were called Peter Klaas van Ruyven and Maria de Nooit, and they shared, so says Andrew, Vermeer's religion. So I began by asking Andrew why he decided to spend 6 years of his life researching and writing this brilliant book?
A lot more than 6 years. But I became fascinated by Vermeer in the late 1990s when I met John Michael Montias. There have only been two figures who count in Vermeer studies. The first was Théophile Torre, and the second was John Michael Montias, neither of whom are art historians, as it happens. And I became fascinated by the possibility of recovering some kind of proper sense of who one of the most famous artists in history is. So it's quite a holy grail to try and find, and it seemed to me that no one else was trying to find it, so I set out to do it.
So yes, as you say, the challenge with Vermeer has always been this remarkable lack of archival evidence. I mean, that's the reason, I suppose, one of the reasons I suppose we call him the Sphinx of Delft, is that, as you say in his book, he's very often not there, and that sometimes seems deliberate. But can you just help us to get into where you started to pull the thread? What started to come for you as you unfolded your thesis on Vermeer?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. You say there's not much archival information. In my opinion, there's a huge amount, a tremendous amount that's just been ignored, on the pretext that it's kind of easier to think of him as a great mystery. It's a great testament to people's laziness. I think the lack of development in Vermeer studies over the last many years. There's a huge amount of stuff. I began with Montias's major discovery, which was shamefully just ignored by people, who should know better. People who are running departments of Dutch art history, people who are running the Rembrandt Research Project, just ignored this information for many years. The fact that Montias discovered that all of Vermeer's paintings, every single one of the major paintings, was owned by one family. It's a document of 1683, and it's unambiguous. Magdalena van Rauven owned everything, like every painting that any museum would ever want to borrow. And no one has ever said, what, why, how, who, where? Like, what did they have in common? What? I mean, it's bizarre, isn't it?
And as you highlight in your book, there is that extraordinary bequest that she gives Vermeer, 500 guilders, which is, I think, as you say, unique, certainly in Dutch 17th century art, for an artist to be given this massive bequest by a patron, or should we say matron. But I think it underlines your thesis, the fact that one person owned so many of his paintings, that we can begin to look for single strands of meaning within those pictures painted for that one person. So can you give us a sense of who Maria was and what the paintings are serving for her?
Well, that was the heart. I mean, of course, no, I can. I mean, that's what the subject of the book was, and that's why it took so many years to research. The information that I've recovered is built on establishing who her networks were. Who did she know? Who were they allowing into the house? Who were these people in the first place? What might they have had in common? And the book, in effect, is a series of Venn diagrams. Once you establish, the fact that she seems to have been part of a network of collegiants who were the radical version of the Remonstrants. And Vermeer's entire family were Remonstrants, and her husband's entire family were Remonstrants, from very different wealth levels, but they seem to have known each other, they seem to have been friends with each other. Vermeer himself, this very unusual name, Johannes Vermeer, he's from the background of a working class family, seems to have been named after the principal Remonstrant preacher, the only Remonstrant preacher in Delft. And that's what draws him together with her. And really, I think the subject of the book is this group of women around Maria. And my thesis is that the paintings were done essentially to help her and her friends get closer to God, and to express their own beliefs, to pray, to meditate. That the pictures were done with a purpose. They're not just genre paintings done for the market, painted for men, to admire sexy women or to smile laughingly down on drunken maids and so on, which is all sort of total preconception, sort of shoved onto Vermeer's pictures wrongly.
Okay, so can we just unpack for listeners what the importance of that remonstrant, that collegiate faith was? So, if I'm generalizing slightly, but until now, until recently, the Vermeer researchers tended to assume that he was a Catholic and perhaps even a Jesuit, and this is in light of his marriage into a Catholic family. But remonstrant is a very different direction. So can you just unpack for us what that means and where that takes us to the meaning of these paintings?
Now, Vermeer studies have been bedeviled by a very, I think you'd have to say, a very primitive sense of the history of religion in Holland. To give you a sense of how I wrote the book, I spent 4 years in the middle of writing the book. I just took 4 years off completely to learn Dutch and to read histories of Dutch theology and to understand the history of the Delft Classics and to understand the progressions within Calvinism and to understand the different splinter movements, the Mennonites, the Calvinists, the Remonstrants, the Collegiants. This was absolutely at the core of working on the book. And this idea that there's Catholics versus Protestants, if you have that as your template, you have no chance of understanding anything about Dutch art or indeed anything about Dutch culture, Dutch literature in the 17th century. It's not like that. Vermeer married a woman who was the daughter of a Jesuit who herself, Maria Tins, his mother-in-law, had married a Calvinist who treated her very badly and insulted her in sectarian terms, calling her a papist hag. She didn't want her daughter to marry a dissenting Protestant such as Vermeer. But her daughter was probably, in my opinion, a Catholic who flirted with the collegiate movement. In other words, was interested in the freedom for women's thinking offered by this new dissenting movement, which welcomed anyone within it. You could be of any belief. You could be Jewish, you could be Muslim, and you could be a collegiate. It's extremely complicated, but very interesting. And the idea that Vermeer was himself a Catholic is completely, utterly, totally impossible. It's not possible for him to have been a Catholic. His principal patron, apart from Maria de Knaut, was Adriaan Patz, who was the spiritual father of the collegiate movement. In other words, Vermeer was a collegiate. You can't have Patz as your patron if you're not a collegiate. Patz is the patron of Spinoza, who was a collegiate. He's a patron of Pierre Bayle. He's the patron of John Locke, extraordinary man. But once you know that Vermeer is in the orbit of Patz, he cannot possibly be a Jesuit. It's not possible it's like a circle and a square. So
why is that idea crept in then? Why is that stuck?
The people who've promoted that idea have never. I don't know how to say it. I mean, there's 17 types of snow in the Eskimo landscape. If you don't know the 17 types of snow, you can't begin to make your way in the Eskimo landscape. Likewise, within Dutch religion and Dutch religious culture. So the people who've propounded that idea, they just simply have never bothered to educate themselves about this subject. They're art historians. They're not religious historians. The trouble is, if you want to understand Vermeer's milieu, you have to become a religious historian. So the only people I've spoken to while writing my book, I haven't spoken to any art historians because they're no help to me. They don't know about it, and their ideas are like incredibly naive. I mean, I don't mean to be rude, but I mean it's just I'm trying to get at the truth. What they think and why they think it, in the end, it's not interesting. They're not knowledgeable people about these things.
Okay, so as you say in the book, there's this sentence which kind of hits you straight between the eyes. The meaning of Vermeer's pictures have been forgotten due to a lack of awareness of the religious context for which they were created. Right. So in the time we have available, Andrew, give us one or two pictures in which this religious context kind of explodes our understanding of those paintings.
Well, I think one of the ways in which this makes itself manifest is the way in which the paintings relate to one another. Once you isolate the paintings that were painted for that house, which was essentially a remonstrant collegiate house, it's a house in which people meditate. They are mostly women. They have a great veneration for Mary Magdalene. They distill the teachings of Christ to internal reflection and outward action. no ceremonies, no services, very little church involvement. Once you understand all that, then the paintings just, oh gosh, goodness me. The Milkmaid and The Woman with the Balance. These two paintings are patently, blatantly, incontrovertibly a pair. And what they represent is the two sides of a collegiate woman's best self. The woman with the balance is meditating on her internal life. Has she cleaved to Christ as she wishes that she should have done? She's got a painting of the Last Judgment on the wall behind her. She's judging herself. She holds a set of scales. The Milkmaid is likewise a woman measuring something out, measuring milk. She's about to crumble bread into that milk to make a meal traditionally prepared for the poor. So we have the vita activa, the milkmaid, the active life, the vita contemplativa, the contemplative life, the woman with the balance, the milkmaid. The paintings are more or less the same size as each other to within an inch. The women are exactly the same scale as one another in relation to the painting. And there's a nail in the wall above each woman to within an inch of the same place. The nail, of course, well, I say of course, but to me it seems obvious, but I've read a lot of Mennonite and Remonstrant literature. The nail in the wall symbolises Christ's sacrifice. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. To me, it's self-evident.
Yeah, yeah. The nail in the book, it comes across a bit like a eureka moment, and as you say, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Do you think, Andrew, that that your thesis that Vermeer was always a religious painter and never stopped being one? Do you think how's that going to go down in our secular age? I mean, I mention that because my my view of Constable landscapes, right, John Constable's landscapes, is that he too was a kind of religiously driven artist who was seeking God in nature. But when I try that thesis on with my art historical colleagues, they look at me with some dread, like I'm a kind of a Jehovah's Witness with my foot in the door trying to convert them. How do you think your thesis is going to go down with Vermeer?
Yeah, but when you do that, you're just being historically responsible and you're being respectful to the past. One of the great diseases of our time is the complacent view that we know better than the past. Oh gosh, they did slavery, they did this, they did that, we're so much better than them. We are no better than them. We are no better. We just make our own mistakes. Look at Gaza. Are we better? Are we better? No, we're not better. We allow these things to happen. They happen in our time. Of course Constable was religious, and I hope that people will learn from my book, and indeed from your lovely book about British art, that there's a huge amount to take from the past. You go to the past to understand the limitations of where you are now. That was what the Renaissance discovered. You go back to the classical past, you read Cicero, and you realise how small you are. And that's what I think. And I think that, the thing I hope most about my book is not actually that people rediscover Vermeer in a different way, but that they listen to the voices of the women around Vermeer. My book is about women. My book is about women who took responsibility, who said, we are sick of the killing, we are sick of the death, we don't want to bury our sons, our husbands and our fathers anymore. Don't tell us to shut up. We will speak. We have a voice. And Vermeer painted for those women. And if I have one hope for my book, it's that those women and the people around them, they get rediscovered. Because Vermeer doesn't need rediscovering. He just needs understanding. They need rediscovering and they need bringing back. I hope people will start writing books about those women.
Well, Andrew, I loved your book. I think it really helps me understand Vermeer. Here it is. I'm holding it up. It's available in all good bookshops, of course. But I just loved it. Was so refreshing to have in art history. I know you say you're not an art historian, but it's so refreshing to have an art historical book which just has a single tight thesis, unapologetically delivered, straight between the eyes. And I admired the confidence with which you made your case. I liked your case. And I not only hope that people buy the book, but that your case goes down and converts all the right people to help us understand Vermeer in future. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, you're very kind. It's always lovely to talk to you, Bendor. Thank you.
Well, I thought it was a great interview. He doesn't hold back. What did you think, Wild?
Oh, yeah, cracking interview. I mean, obviously, Andrew knows what he's talking about in most cases. He's another one of these missed broadcasters who's been chucked off the BBC. But in his case, he spent the time well, hasn't he? It's a fascinating book and such a fascinating thought, really, as well as being a fascinating interview. I mean, what really struck me was how passionate he was in his defence of his own arguments here. He's obviously totally convinced of the rightness of his understanding of Vermeer's work. And what's strange is that this, well, not strange, what's interesting is that this passion of his isn't what you expect from Vermeer, isn't it? Because Vermeer's art isn't passionate as such. It isn't certainly religiously passionate. It's very almost dispassionate and calm and charming and beautiful. Those are the kinds of things that people say about Vermeer. And yet here's Andrew basically presenting him as a kind of religious firebrand who used his art to, at the service of this exquisite religion, about which I have to say I know absolutely nothing, this particular branch of Christianity. So it was interesting, really interesting. I'm not 100% convinced that he's going to take me all the way with this and that I accept everything he says. Firstly, because of this slight kind of clash in moods between his mood and Vermeer's, but also because religion, in my history of religion and in my understanding and experience of religion, it can lead people to these crazy journeys where their sense of certainty grows and grows and grows, and it takes them further and further away from the visible facts. And I wonder if perhaps Andrew, having spent 4 years learning Dutch, as he says, really delving into it and getting caught up in the religious dynamism of it all, I wonder if perhaps he may have strayed a little bit too far in his acceptance of Vermeer's crazy religiosity. So that's a slight suspicion, but it's a very interesting read, and what a great interview.
Well, I don't know if Andrew has been bound up in that religious journey, but I think important to bear in mind that was the world that they were inhabiting, that Vermeer was inhabiting. They were far more certain and involved in religious matters than we are today, and certainly that we tend to give them credit for. But let's see how the argument goes down. And I really do encourage people to get the book. It makes a lovely Christmas present, of course, and is a really good read.
Indeed it is, yes, and what a great interview again. So listen, we're moving on from Vermeer, who painted lots of beautiful people, but that's principally, I think, because none of them were members of any royal family, either here or in the Netherlands or in Spain or in Austria-Hungary, any of the places where royal families usually have themselves painted. And we can be confident about that because we're going to be looking at some of the royal family paintings that art has produced over the centuries. And we're prompted, of course, by recent events among the Windsors, and especially the history of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and what he's been up to. And so we decided that because the history of royal portraiture is so checkered, you and I should do the public service of deciding which of the scores of royal portraits in art history, which of them can be ranked as the worst, or let's just say the ugliest. And as you said, heaven knows there are a lot of them.
The Waldy and Bendy Awards.
Ah, yes, Bendy. So the Waldy and Bendy Awards. Now, interestingly, before we get on to this, can I show you something? So, basically, some chap in Norway, we've got international audiences these days. So we've always got the 3 people in Ohio who listen to us religiously. And I love their little missives to us because it makes us feel as if we belong somewhere in the world. But there's this new fellow.
Yeah, thank you, Ohio.
Yeah, thank you, Ohio. Thank you indeed. Various other states in America where we've got one viewer or two. But there's this chap from Norway, right, called Vidar Bratlund Mæland. Sorry if I've strangled your name there, Vidar. Vidar Bratlund Mæland. He liked the Waldy and Bendy Awards so much that he has sent us a medal he's made. So this medal here, can you see it, Bendy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fantastic.
It's it says Waldy and Bendy Awards. It's based on your ludicrous theory that there was a painting by Sir Thomas Lawrence in which he smuggled an image of a swan in. We rubbished that theory at the time, but it has inspired this fantastic Vidar Bratlund Mæland to make this excellent medal. So although we're not actually going to give this out, it's going to sit on my desk, we can at least hold it up and make people envious of the fact that we've got it, and they can get this if they win the Waldy and Bendy Award, at least theoretically. But moving on quickly.
Thank you, Vidar.
Thank you so much, Vidar.
That's lovely for you to gift Waldemar this lovely thing, inspired by my brilliant thesis.
When I come up to Scotland, I'll bring it with me, Bendel. So you know what? You can touch it. How about that?
Thank you.
So yes, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Now, of course, one of the funny things about all this, Bendor, is that the royals everywhere, but particularly the British royals, have a long history of marrying teenage and underage girls. Until recent times, it was almost the norm, wasn't it? Your man Henry VII, his mother was 14 when she gave birth to him, Lady Margaret Beaufort. And Richard II of England, he married Isabella of Valois, and he was 29, and she was 6 years old when they married. Even Catherine de' Medici, of course, the future Queen of France, when she married the Duke of Orleans, Henry, she was aged 14. So there's a history amongst the royals of marrying young. And not only marrying young, there's also a history of the royals of marrying their first cousins, of uncles marrying nieces, of chronic inbreeding. And nowhere, I think, is this more evident than in the history of the kings of Spain. So I'm going to kick off my suggestions for the worst ever, ugliest royal portrait by turning to that maestro of royal ugliness, who is, of course, Goya. Now, with Goya, who became, in fact, the royal painter in 1800, the actual official royal portraitist of Spain, with Goya, it's difficult to know what to choose because so many of his royal portraits are so ghastly. The most famous one in the Prado is, of course, that one of the whole family of Charles IV, where you've got his wife Maria Louisa of Parma standing next to him. And there's about 10 of them huddled together. And somebody described it looking like the cast of a corner shop that had won the lottery. They look lowly, they look scurrilous, they look very unroyal. And yet, somehow or other, Goya managed to get away with this. But I don't think that's his ugliest set of royals. I think his very ugliest is this portrait that he did of Ferdinand VII, who was the king of Spain after Napoleon. So Napoleon, as you know, made his brother the king of Spain. That was Joseph Bonaparte. And then afterwards, when the Spanish monarchy was restored, it was Ferdinand VII, who was actually the son of Charles IV, who was the previous Goya victim, who became the king. And he was an odious, ghastly person. I think he was described as an odious toad of a king. And Goya paints him in a kind of fake battlefield pose, standing there. It's another painting in the Prado. It was painted around 1815, so that's after the restoration of the monarchy. And he's just so damn ugly, isn't he? Look at his face. You would have thought that anybody who was once the royal painter, the man officially charged with creating the royal image, would have done a little bit in the way of flattery, wouldn't you? But if you look at him there, standing there trying to look pompous, covered with all his royal gongs and his sashes, and yet he really does look like the last person you'd want as a king, don't you think? So out of Goya's work, this is the one I'd propose as the kind of ugliest of Goya's many ugly royals. What do you think?
Well, he's definitely not a looker. But Weld, I have to say, before we get a little bit too sidebar of shame, I must say I do see some of these unfortunate people, perhaps victim is too strong a word, but they couldn't help the way they looked. It wasn't their fault that various centuries of unwise marital choices had led to them looking like this. So I feel some sympathy for them. But my question really is, how on earth did Goya get away with it? Because it wasn't just always in his royal portraits. He somehow managed to make his sitters look completely ridiculous and often very ugly. And I'm just amazed that they kept lining up at his studio door saying, please, Mr. Goya, can you paint my portrait?
I agree with you. To me, it's totally inexplicable. How did he get away with it? Going back to that portrait of Charles IV and his family, where they're all arranged in a line and they look like these shopkeepers from a corner shop rather than the big Bourbon royals of Spain. If you look at them carefully, each of them has a kind of specific ugliness to them. It's as if he's actually gone out of his way to point out what they are. And yet this picture, it was inspired by Velázquez's Las Meninas, so it's a similar sort of setup. It has similar ambitions to portray the royals as these great kind of ruling dynasty of Spain. It's even got Goya himself in it, standing at the back in the way that Velázquez puts himself in the great Las Meninas. I mean, maybe amongst their inbreeding problems was incredibly bad eyesight. Maybe they couldn't actually see what it was that he'd painted, and that the dreadfulness of his images of them passed them by. Because time after time, you look at Goya's royal figures and you do indeed wonder how he got away with it.
I think we've rumbled Goya in a way that his sitters did not. But can I take you back for our next choice to the Tudor age? You've mentioned Henry VIII already and Henry VII. I've got a portrait here of Elizabeth I. It was painted in around about 1560, so just after she becomes queen. She becomes queen in 1558, and it's in the National Portrait Gallery. Have you seen this on the wall there, Weld?
I guess so. I'm afraid all the portraits of Elizabeth I tend to sort of blur in my memory into one sort of weirdly faceless image. I mean, I remember the clothes sometimes better than I remember the faces. But
Yeah, so we see her in half length, and this is one example of a whole range of portraits, a type of portraits where she looks the same, and she's normally shown at half length. And the really interesting thing about it is I wouldn't necessarily say it's ugly, but it's bad. And the reason it's bad, I think, is fascinating. So that's what I want to tell you about. What we see is Elizabeth looking slightly off camera. She's looking directly towards us, but her face is switched a bit, so we sort of see her in profile. And she looks a bit bug-eyed, and she's very pale. And whoever has painted this type, whoever made this first impression of her, clearly was no good as an artist. They weren't even on Goya standards of making royal sitters look bad and unfortunate. Would you agree with me, Weld, that the main feature of Elizabeth I here is her rather beaky nose? She's got a bit of a boxer's nose.
yes, indeed. Maybe she was punched by the Earl of Essex or something. It's not a great nose. I haven't actually noticed it before, but now that you point it out, not great indeed.
I think this is a key to the picture. It's a really interesting nose. And as the proud owner of a beaky boxer's nose, I think I have free license to focus on this unfortunate aspect of the portrait. So Elizabeth, as I said, she becomes queen in 1558. And most monarchs, when they are newly enthroned, want to use portraiture as a way of kind of helping solidify their arrival on the throne. So they want to flood the market, flood the world with images of themselves. Now, weirdly enough, Elizabeth I really disliked sitting for her portrait. When her brother, Edward VI, was king and wanted to have a portrait of her, it was arranged, but she was a very reluctant sitter. And when the portrait was sent to Edward VI, she warned him that it was only the outward shadow of the body. So when Elizabeth becomes queen, she doesn't sit for a new portrait. And this kind of vacuum is filled with portraits like this, in particular, this portrait type. Now, let me go back to the nose. I think the reason she's got a boxer's nose here is because people felt that she had to look like her father. And Henry VIII, of course, he famously had a big boxer's nose. So it's so interesting to see when this portrait type gets made, they turn Elizabeth's head so that her most unflattering feature, her nose, actually becomes more visually prominent, because it was a way of identifying her as part of the Tudor dynasty and establishing her legitimacy. What do you think of my nose thesis?
That's an extraordinary idea. So are there pictures of her where she hasn't got a boxer's nose, which you feel are more trustworthy?
Yeah, no, that's the interesting thing. Later on, once she does start to sit for her portrait, because what happens is that the badness of these portraits actually becomes a real problem for her, particularly in marriage negotiations. So when her ambassadors are abroad and trying to say to, for example, the Archduke Charles of Austria, would you like to wed the Queen of England? They look at these portraits and they go, not sure about that. So what happens is that new portraits get made, and all the later portraits of her don't show the boxer's nose to anything like the same extent. They become either more faithful to her, if we don't really know what she looks like, or more flattering, depending on your view of these things. But happily, after this picture we've been discussing, which is, I think, the worst of her reign and is acknowledged by everyone at the time of being the worst type of her, it quickly gets consigned to history and they get some better painters in.
Oh, okay. Oh, good. So her future's bright, but as we come to her at this very point, she's at her very worst. That's interesting, isn't it? But I'm going to move on there because unfortunately, Bender, I wasn't sure what you were going to do, right? I've gone for another Elizabeth. This time, Elizabeth II. So that's our queen, the one that we probably remember so well for most of our lives. She was our monarch, right? And one of the misfortunes of the Windsors in general, I think, for me, Her Majesty in particular, is that there was all these opportunities in their time to have great art made about them, and all of those opportunities were either turned down or just didn't work out. So there are no great portraits at all, I think, of the Windsors.
We've got to be careful, Weld, before you stick the knife too far into the Windsors. I myself, at least, haven't totally given up hopes of an honour, a knighthood. I do want to be Sir Bendor. Perhaps you've given up all hope, but steady on with the Windsor stuff, okay?
Sir Bendor, well, you've got a chance. I stopped having a chance decades ago, so that's never going to happen. So no, I'm not going to stop putting the knife into the Windsors, artistically that is, because I think they deserve lots of opprobrium. And my choice here is going to be the one picture that one would have hoped might go against the grain and actually be a great bit of contemporary portraiture involving the royal family, and that was Lucian Freud's portrait of Elizabeth II, which was painted in the years 2000 and 2001, unveiled then. Because Freud's a great painter, no one argues with that. He was a great painter, and when we heard that he had been granted this audience with Her Majesty and that he was going to paint her, and in fact did over the course of, I believe it was 19 months, struggled and worked away at this image of the Queen. When we heard that was happening, we all thought, wow, at last, a great royal portrait's going to come out. Unfortunately, the opposite happened. Now, I will never forget my profound sense of disappointment when this was finally unveiled. And apart from anything else, it's tiny. So it's, 6 inches wide, 9 inches tall. I mean, it's not much bigger than a book of stamps. And you sort of wonder, well, hang on, he was working on this for 19 months. What was he doing if this was all that came out of it, right? But then when it appeared, I mean, dear me, there were some rude comments made about it. Various journalists came up. I mean, there was a sort of journalistic bun fight to see who could be most insulting about it. So some said she looked more like a corgi than a queen. Yeah, others said that it was a monstrosity, etc., etc. It was badly received.
Yeah, do you remember the Sun headline? It was front page, "It's a travesty, Your Majesty."
Well, I don't remember it only because there were so many of those kinds of headlines. It was just generally received as a very bad picture. Now, I have a particular problem with this because, I mean, people said that he'd made her look old, that he'd made her look wrinkled, that her jaw was sagging, that her skin was yellow. And of course, this slightly ludicrous insistence, which I think was actually something Freud did, that he insisted that she wear the diamond diadem, which is the crown she's got on her head, which is best known, of course, because that's the crown the Queen's wearing on the stamps that we used to put out. You know, the stamps always had the Queen's diadem on it. And Freud, I think, only really insisted that that she wear it because he wanted her to look like she does in the stamps. And by and large, the proportions of this are similar. But anyway, everybody said she looked old, she looked sallow, she looked unhappy, she looked grumpy, and she certainly didn't look royal, that's for sure. My big problem with this is I met the Queen, right? When I was at Channel 4, I made a big series about the Royal Collection, and it was presented by the
So
surveyor.
you do actually have a knighthood. You've just never been open about it.
No, I haven't got a knighthood. I never will have one because I've been rude about knighthoods for my entire professional career. I will continue to be rude about them forever. I don't believe in the whole knighthood system. But anyway, I did go and see the Queen. But what I most remember about it, Bendor, was how gorgeous her complexion was. She had, I've never seen anybody like it, right? This was this was about 4 or 5 years before the Freud picture was painted, right? So not much different. She had the most gorgeous, creamy, beautiful, pale complexion. And you could just see from the moment you looked at it that she'd been pampered all her life, that people had looked after her skin, that she'd been treated really gently and beautifully. And she also had these gorgeous blue eyes that were the colour of fresh cornflowers in a field. And it was such a poetic effect. And even though she was small and polite, there was something amazingly otherworldly about her presence because of this gorgeous skin and the blue eyes. So what really upset me about this Freud picture is the fact that actually it totally misrepresents her. And the reason it does that, I think, is because Freud's way of working is with these big, bold brush strokes, right? So he never worked with a small brush. He works with a big brush. And so these bold strokes of his that I think are meant to shape the sort of physiognomy of the head, give it a kind of three-dimensional cubist feel. But when they're insensitively applied, they look like drags and sags and wrinkles. And so his painting method is so wrong for this occasion that he makes her look like something she wasn't. And that, for me, is the great shame of this, because a really sensitive portraitist would have finally captured this gentleness, this regal composure of hers, this fantastic complexion. And all that's missing. And that, I think, is why this is such an awful portrait. So it's right up there in my list of the worst royal pictures of all time. What do you think?
Yeah, I have seen it in the flesh, and I too have met the Queen World, which is very nice. It's not a great painting. I don't think it even succeeds in having the merit of being subversive. It's just kind of bleh. So I share your disappointment, Weld. But I'm intrigued by your mention of the big fat brush for a small picture, because my next choice, Weld, is a miniature painting. It's only about 2 inches tall, and it was painted with tiny, tiny brushes. I am going to talk to you about it's a brilliant portrait, but it's ugly for a fascinating reason, by Samuel Cooper, who was one of our great portrait artists of the 17th century, and it shows Oliver Cromwell. And it's painted in about 1653, and it belongs to the Duke of Buccleuch, and it is unfinished, and it's wonderful. Have you seen it in the flesh, Wild?
No, I haven't. But before you go on to it, was Cromwell a royal? I mean, he doesn't qualify, does he? I know he was the big boss for a while, but surely you can't inveigle him into this particular list, can you?
Good question, Weld. I agree. There's a little bit of shoehorning on my part. Although he technically did turn down the crown, he was made Lord Protector, and he lived in Hampton Court Palace. They called him Your Highness, and his daughters were princesses. So I think he secretly wanted to be a bit royal, and he sort of counts. So I'm getting him in the list on that way. Does that satisfy you?
Sort of. When you first sent this to me, the thing that really got me is, if you look at it now, right, he looks like he's got a square hairstyle. So it actually looks like he's got an incredibly modern sort of square, I don't know, a kind of a cubistic afro cut or something. And I thought, wow, what an amazing hairstyle. It's not a picture I know, but go on, tell me more about it. I'm intrigued, first of all, by why you would wish to smuggle a non-royal into a list of royals, but also into a bit of history about this admittedly beautifully done image.
Okay, well, classic roundhead hairstyle, of course, but the main feature of this miniature portrait, which basically just shows Oliver Cromwell's head, is if you notice and look above his right eye, you will see a pimple. Well, it's actually a wart. And I have looked at this wart under magnification because I have exhibited this miniature, and it is horribly white, flaky, warty. It's the most beautifully painted and horrible wart in art history. And I think this is an absolute key for the painting. So we have to consider that we've had the Civil War. Charles I has had his head cut off. And Charles I, well, as you know, was painted by as many portrait artists as he could muster.
Notably the great William Dobson.
Notably the great William Dobson, and notably the no less great Anthony van Dyck. Now, I think both of those artists, but principally I have to concede Anthony van Dyck, were guilty of flattering King Charles I, who was really a tiny, spindly man, and Van Dyck was quite keen on putting him on a massive horse, looking tall and handsome. So that's the backdrop. Oliver Cromwell, he's in charge. He's been made in this year, 1653, Lord Protector. But he too needs a new portrait to reinforce his position, for much the same reasons that the Tudors did. Okay, but what he wants is something different. So he goes to Samuel Cooper, and he very explicitly says to him, this is the line, we have an idea of what he said. He says to Samuel Cooper, I desire you would use all your skill to paint my picture truly like me, and not flatter me at all, but remark all these roughnesses, pimples, warts, and everything you see. Otherwise, I will not pay you a farthing for it. And this, Wilde, is where we get the expression in English, warts and all, because Cromwell wanted to be painted warts and all. And he did that because he wanted to say that although he was in charge, he was a kind of quasi-royal figure politically, culturally, he was going to be completely different.
Fascinating. See, I've zoomed in on your wart. I'm able to do that on my fantastic high-tech system here. It's not that ugly, is it? I mean, were warts as bad a thing then as we might think of them now? I mean, it's a wart, but hey, why not? You know, if you're being true to somebody, unless you have a value system that really, really finds warts repulsive rather than a normal sign of aging, that's not necessarily an awful thing to do to him, is it, to show the wart?
Well, I think if you consider, have you ever seen a wart on a royal portrait before then?
Well, no, certainly not on Elizabeth I, no.
No, yeah, as we were discussing with Elizabeth I, great pains made to make things like her smallpox scars disappear. So it is a tiny wart in real life when you're looking at the miniature, but the mere fact it's there, I think, is massive. It's an extraordinary kind of moment. And of course, after the restoration of Charles II and the monarchy comes back, we don't see many more warts on royal portraits, even under Lucian Freud's guise.
Not in England, but in Spain you do. Sorry to go back to Goya, but that portrait of Carlos IV and his family, I think it's the king's sister is sort of skulking at the back of one of the nephews. And if you zoom in on that a bit, you'll see she's got a great big black blotch on her face. And it's either some kind of disfiguring smallpox-like stain on the royal face, or some people say, you know, there was a fashion at one point for painting fake moles onto yourself to make yourself look more attractive. But in this instance, I think that the blotch is too big and ghastly to possibly be any kind of Marilyn Monroe-like added dot. So Goya was capable of it. Sorry, I digress. Goya was capable of it, but I take your main point that by and large royal portraits don't have warts.
I think Goya is definitely emerging as our purveyor of the worst royal portraits.
There could be thousands of others, but I think we've picked out a fine array of ugly royals. The time has come when we can't just leave it at that. We've got to stop messing about and decide which is the worst of them. So let's get down and start voting, shall we? Meanwhile, maybe Taya can just show them all again so our audience can have a quick recap of the ugly royals that we've got for them while you and I do our scores.
Okay, producer Taya has been collating the results and has given her own invaluable view. Taya, who is the winner?
Well, first, let's start at the bottom with 5 points. In 4th place is the Elizabeth I portrait.
Okay, so she's the least worst royal portrait.
Least
Elizabeth
worst,
I. Okay,
yeah.
I'm pleased with that.
So in 3rd place, with 6 points, we have the warty Cromwell.
Oh, okay.
And then this will be the reveal. In 2nd place, with 8 points, is Ferdinand VII, Toya. Which means, of course, that the 1st place with the ugliest royal portrait in art goes to Freud's Elizabeth II.
Well, do you know what? I'm surprised by that, but at the same time delighted, because it is such a bad thing, and it is such a missed opportunity, wasn't it? He could have done something so wonderful, ended up doing something so ghastly. So I apologise to Her Majesty up there in the heavens for that, but it is a terrible picture. All I can say is to beat Goya and his royal families in this competition is a hell of an achievement, and it's certainly worthy of a major Waldy and Bendy Swanee Award. So there you are.
Yeah.
Lucian Freud and the Queen. You are the winners.
Lucian Freud gets the first ever Swanee. This is a momentous moment. I'm so pleased, actually. I thought Goya was going to wrap it up, but no, Lucian Freud snuck in at the end.
He did. He
Won
did.
the day.
Yes. And folks, if you want to see the Swanee even more clearly, then don't forget you can go to the ZTZ channel on YouTube, where you'll see plenty of images of the Swanee and both sides of it, because it's a double-faced Swanee. So that's all there, and it's also in the show notes. Taya's going to put that up. We've had fun, but also lots of sadness on this programme, having to deal with the BBC's arts coverage and awful royal pictures. But we've also had excitement in the shape of the great Andrew Graham-Dixon and the fact that we broke the world record for having the most celebrated art historians in one programme. And on that delightful note, which cheers me no end, I'm going to just wave a sweet bye-bye from me.
Bye-bye from me. See you all next week.
Waldy and Bendy.
This is an interruption from the Waldy and Bendy legal department, who would like to point out that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor continues to deny any and all allegations against him.